everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Heather and today I'm here to wrap up all of the books that I read in October. So October is always Victober, and as such I have been reading a bunch of Victorian literature, but I will save those towards the end, and I will start with the 3 other books that I read in October first. So first of all, I did some traveling in October, and one Sunday my friend Veronica and I started to go back to the Metropolitan Opera in New York, and she had brought along a crafting project, so I needed something to read on the train while she did that. So I borrowed and finished on the train journey there and back Catherine Called Birdie by Karen Cushman. Yes, I own a physical copy, but it was easier just to read something on my phone at the time. I reread this with the new film that I think has come out here in the US on Amazon Prime as well. And I remembered having read this back when I was in middle school, but I couldn't really remember the plot, and I wanted to see how well it compared to what I had seen in the trailers. I enjoyed this book. There were some true giggle moments. I loved noticing things that I don't think I noticed in middle school, such as it's written like her diary, and so every day starts with, of course, the date, and then medieval England being extremely Catholic, she writes down what saint's day it is that day. And I'm just going to use the month of December as an example. So, 2nd day of December, Feast of Saint Bibiana, beaten with leaden whips until she died. 3rd day of December, Feast of Saint Birinus, Saint Birinus, Apostle of Wessex, first Bishop of Dorchester, and builder of churches. 4th day of December, Feast of Saint Barbara, said to have been martyred in Nicodemia, Heliopolis, Tuscany, and Rome. 5th day of December, Feast of Saint Crispina, who was shaved bald to humiliate her before she was beheaded. 6th day of December, Feast of Saint Nicholas, who loves children, pawnbrokers, and sailors. 12th day of December, Feast of Saints Mercuria, Dionysia, Ammonaria, and the other Ammonaria, holy women killed by heathens. Feast of Saint Hybald, abbot of our own Lincolnshire. I wonder if he is a relative. 15th day of December, Feast of Saint Offa, king of the East Saxons, who left his wife, his lands, his family, and his country to become a monk in Rome and die. And not only are some of those quite humorous, but it also hit me that the male saints tend to meet quite positive ends, whereas all of the female saints did receive sainthood but had to be tortured and killed and treated in various horrible ways first. And that, to me, is kind of what the film brings out of this book. I love Catherine as a character. She's a feisty, middle school aged girl. I don't think she gets to be more than, say, 14. And she's challenged for a year to keep a diary as a way of trying to keep her emotions under control, which I don't think it actually helps. She has terrible outbursts. She does not want to be controlled. She is fiercely independent and rebellious. A lot of what she said, I would lean over and read to Veronica, and she would be like, yep, those are our students. Yep. Mm-hmm. I'm not so sure about how this book ended. It's kind of positive, but it also came so out of the blue and seemed to be very out of character for her that it almost felt like the Taming of the Shrew ending. I don't know how I felt about that ending, and I'd be intrigued to see what the film does with it as well. But I would highly encourage you to read it if you enjoyed the film or if you've been thinking about watching it. All of Karen Cushman's books are really great. She did a whole series of books about medieval girls. They were all girls. There was this one, The Midwife's Apprentice, and Matilda Bone. And then she also did one about a girl in who was part of the westward expansion or possibly the California Gold Rush, called The Ballad of Lucy Whipple, which was also very good. And I read them all when I was in middle school. I also participated in the fall mixtapeathon readathon. That may be slightly redundant, but I don't care. And that was hosted by Jean of Jean's Bookish Thoughts and Lianne of Literary Diversions, or the Novel Menagerie. Some of her accounts are in one name, some of them are in the other name. And a lot of other lovely booktubers and bookstagrammers that I don't know very well, but they are very good friends with. They are planning to do one of these per season, which is lovely. I'm very much looking forward to the winter one. But for that readathon, I filled 2 of the prompts. The first was to, I believe, read a book with a strong female heroine, so you witch energy. And this, I think, filled both of those, because it was Before the Devil Breaks You by Libba Bray. And this is the 3rd book in the Diviners series. And there are a lot of very strong and somewhat witchy female characters in here. I can't tell you a lot about this book specifically, but the Diviners series in general takes place in New York City in the mid to late 1920s. And it follows a group of teenagers who all discover that they are diviners, that they have some sort of supernatural ability. And so they're all gathered together and not only become friends and test their skills, but also there has been a latent evil power sweeping through the country, and it comes to a head when they all gather together. And they have to figure out how to defeat it, and also why they are all together. Why have they all found each other? There are 2 mysteries. Number 1, we have found out approximately what the latent evil is and how it works, but at the same time, all of the diviners are trying to figure out why they are diviners. They have figured out that it was some sort of government project, and they're trying to figure out more about it. At the same time, a lot of them are falling in love, and all of the trials and tribulations that come with that. It also brings in the late 1920s and 1930s obsession with eugenics and the various political aspects of that, religious bigotry working its way into politics. Was fascinating, it was gripping, it was horrifying, it was heartbreaking. Libba Bray constructs her books so beautifully that part of me is desperate to read the last book in the series now, and the other part of me says, no, give it a while before you do this to yourself again. So I may wait a little bit on King of Crows. But strong trigger warnings for a lot of really horrible things. But to me, at least, it is so well worth it. It was extra horrifying knowing that this was published in 2017, and you can see so many parallels with the rise of the Trump administration with what was going on in 1927. So I'm really glad that I read this. Not sure when I'm going to get to the last book. I'll keep you posted. And then the other book that I read for the fall mixtapeathon brought me back into Victoriana, because the prompt was to read a book with nature on the cover. And so I read The Making of a Marchioness by Frances Hodgson Burnett, which was one of the books that she wrote for adults. In fact, I think it was 2 books originally, but it has been bound into a single volume because the first one is much shorter and far lighter on plot than the other. Having read The Secret Garden and A Little Princess, I didn't so much love A Little Princess, but I loved The Secret Garden. I thought I knew what to expect going into this one. This book is about Emily Fox Seton, who's a young woman trying to live independently and thus quite impoverished, who is invited to a country estate for a week, I think, maybe a month. One of these country house parties where you would come and stay for a period of time. And she ends up meeting a marquis or marquis. I'm never sure which is masculine, which is feminine, and which is the French pronunciation and the English pronunciation. But nonetheless, she meets a very rich, titled man. And I don't feel like it's a spoiler to say this based on the title. They do, in fact, become engaged and get married, so she becomes a Marchioness. And so I thought it was going to be quite an Austen-like type of plot, but it was the furthest thing from that. I read a description that said the first half is kind of a Cinderella story. And indeed it is, but it happens so quickly, it is so out of the blue, that it really takes you by surprise, and it doesn't feel quite finished. So I was glad that there was the second half. But the second half has an entirely different tone. It becomes more of a sensation novel and a melodrama. And the antics that go on once she is married to this man are ridiculous. I never saw them coming. I'm really glad that I read it, and it's a really enjoyable read. I just wish it were marketed differently so I could have expected that tonal shift more. Then to the books I read for Victober. The first was our group read of The Mayor of Casterbridge, which also features someone with a chronic illness or disability. In this case, our main character has alcoholism. This was a reread for me. This was the edition I bought for my university class. My senior seminar was on Thomas Hardy. And thus I was quite pleased to discover that this is in fact a lot shorter than it looks, because the actual novel only takes up about half this book, and the other half is all sorts of critical essays and those sorts of things. So this is about a man, Michael Henchard, who within the first chapter, in a drunken frenzy, auctions off his wife and baby daughter. And that's really all I can tell you. Apart from that, it then follows him about 20 or so years later, along with that wife and that daughter, and how they all meet again and what on earth happens to them all. I really enjoyed rereading it. I was still fascinated by the characters. I felt like some of the twists and turns were a little bit unnecessary, but at the same time they felt very right. I don't know how Hardy does that, but he does. And yeah, I'm really glad I reread it. And I feel like I should reread more Hardy, but then I look at my TBR stacks, multiple, next to me, and I just don't have the time. Then for something Victorian to read and then watch a screen adaptation, I read Lady Windermere's Fan by Oscar Wilde out of this collection. This is a collection of 4 of his plays, and I read The Importance of Being Earnest, and I've seen Salome, but I haven't seen or read the 2 in the middle. So I decided to read Lady Windermere's Fan this time around. And there's an adaptation on BritBox that I've been meaning to watch. I will probably try and watch it today or tomorrow. I'm filming this on the 29th, so it still counts if I watch it within this weekend. But speaking about what I read, I found it really interesting. So we follow Lady Windermere, who is newly married to Lord Windermere. Within, I would say, 2 or 3 years, they do have a baby son together. And she is a very pure being. She wants to believe the best of everyone. She wants to do the right thing. But she has this friend, Lord Darlington. And Lord Darlington is the epitome of society and the wrongdoing that society allows, the temptation, the cynicism. And he keeps pouring this temptation and cynicism in her ear, and for the most part she doesn't listen. Until he touches on the fact that her husband has been seen hanging around with this other woman. And he's invited her here to the party tonight. He's been going to her home. And Lady Windermere wants to trust her husband, but more and more people, him and a variety of ladies who end up coming over as well, keep hinting that there's probably something more to their relationship. Everything goes on from there. There is a major twist when you find out who this woman actually is and why her husband keeps going to visit her. I wasn't sure how I felt about it at the time. I think I love it now. The more that I think about it, the more I really enjoy it, and I would love to see how that relationship is acted, because I feel like so many more unspoken things could be said when you act it rather than just reading it. I mean, that happens with every play, doesn't it? So I'm really looking forward to watching the adaptation to see how that relationship plays out. For Roz's challenge to read a Victorian poem, I picked a random poem out of the complete poems of Thomas Hardy, also from that university class. And so I pulled out At a Bridal, which is here. It's very, very short. It's one of his Wessex poems. And I thought, there, I will read this poem and I will fulfill that challenge. I've just been to my cousin's wedding, so there, this will be a lovely choice. What I didn't anticipate is what it's actually about. It's not actually about a wedding. It's more the thoughts of a man at a wedding as he looks at, presumably, his wife and thinks about the children that they were unable to have, which is a brilliant turn, but at the same time is a really depressing way to start your morning. So I have mixed feelings about that poem, but I am glad that I read or reread it. I don't remember if that was one of the ones that we read for university or not. For Marissa's challenge to read a short story, I went into this collection of Robert Louis Stevenson short stories and picked out Thrawn Janet. I knew nothing about Thrawn Janet going in, except that it appeared to be written at least partially in Scots. So I thought that would be kind of fun, because Robert Louis Stevenson sometimes plays on his Scottishness and sometimes he doesn't. So I'm always intrigued by when he does. Honestly, I know there was supposed to be a huge supernatural twist to it. It's telling the story of this minister and the fact that he employs kind of the village pariah. She's this woman that no one will go near because they all think she's a witch. He doesn't believe it, so he employs her as his housekeeper, really. And then horrible things start to happen. There's this huge supernatural moment at the end, but I honestly couldn't understand what it was. I'm not sure if it was the Scots or the way he framed the story, but it was completely unclear to me what had actually happened to this man. Unless that's supposed to be the freaky part, that you don't actually know what happened. I don't know, it was just middling for me. I'm not sure if I'm going to hang on to this collection, because I do have Jekyll and Hyde in a different edition. So I don't know, I'm of two minds. And then lastly, for a Bildungsroman, I read or listened to Nicholas Nickleby by Charles Dickens. And this was an edition put out as a podcast by Audible, and it was narrated by Cobna Holdbrook Smith. It was wonderful. I wasn't sure if I was going to make it. I even started it a few days early because it is so long, as almost anything that Dickens writes is. I was very glad I was kind of familiar with the trajectory of the story, because he does veer off once or twice into long and rambling tangents that have nothing to do with the plot, such as an entire 2 chapters where travelers at an inn are just sitting around swapping ghost tales. I feel like an editor really should have grabbed that and done something with it. It's like those episodes on television where it was all a dream and the writers really just need a vacation. But apart from that, it was absolutely wonderful. Smike isn't necessarily physically disabled or has some sort of chronic illness like I thought from having watched a stage production or other film productions. It simply hints that he probably had some sort of learning disability. Although from a Victorian perspective, I'm not sure how true that actually is. Regardless, it didn't fit that prompt the way I thought, but it is definitely a Bildungsroman because Nicholas, even though he is 18 when we start, through his various adventures comes to terms with the ways of the world. He has grown up a very sheltered boy, and he has to come to terms with the crueler sides of the world. I loved revisiting all of these characters. The entire plot point of Kate and the various suitors that her uncle brings in hits me so hard every time because it's just proof of how things still have not changed. We as a species have not learned. And that is just so moving. And yeah, it was just a thrill to be with these characters. Nicholas's impetuosity did get up my nose every now and again, I'm not gonna lie, but it was still a wonderful experience, and I'm very glad I did. I also plan on rewatching the stage production, however, that will not be my adaptation prompt for this Victober, since given that it's 9 hours long, we are definitely not going to fit that in between now and the end of the month. So my mother and I will be rewatching that sometime in November instead. And then finally, I have started reading Vanity Fair. Why, with a week to go of the readathon, did I decide to read a 750-page book? I have no idea. I am definitely not going to finish that before the end of the month either. And given my TBR for November, which has already gone up, I probably won't finish Vanity Fair until December. I am enjoying it so far. I have yet to tell whether or not Thackeray's tangents pay off. I'm only about 100 pages in. But I am enjoying it, and again, I'm really intrigued to see what the most recent television adaptation is like after I have read it, especially since Kate Howe gave it the high praise of feeling like it was better than the book. So those were the books that I managed to read in October. It has gotten to be incredibly busy at work these days. I'm hanging in there, but it's a struggle. So I hope that I am able to read as much, if not more, in November and December. But let me know down below, what were you able to read this October? Did you participate in any of these readathons? Or if you have any other recommendations for me based on what I've said about these books. Until next time, be safe, be well, and happy reading. Bye everyone.